What would you risk for a complete stranger? For Catherine Evans, a waitress buried in debt and fighting for her sister's life, that question became terrifyingly real. Every night she served the city's elite, including the charismatic millionaire Alexander Sterling and his flawless girlfriend. But one evening, Catherine saw something she wasn't supposed to see, a betrayal so cold it chilled her to the bone. She had a choice: stay silent and keep the job she desperately needed, or tell the truth and risk everything. She chose the truth. What happened next wasn't just a thank you. It was a test that would unravel a conspiracy far darker than simple infidelity. The scent of truffle oil, aged leather, and quiet money clung to the air at Aria, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign. For Catherine Evans, it smelled like survival. Each perfectly polished wine glass, each precisely folded napkin, was a small step away from the eviction notice taped to her apartment door, and a tiny step closer to the specialist treatments her younger sister Ava so desperately needed. At 24, Catherine moved with a grace born of exhaustion and practice. She was a ghost in a crisp black uniform. Her presence felt only when a glass needed refilling or a plate needed clearing. She was an expert at being invisible, a skill she had honed over 2 years of serving a clientele who looked through her as if she were part of the decor. Among the regulars were Alexander Sterling and Isabella Romano. They were Aria's royalty. He was a titan of the tech industry, a man whose picture was often splashed across business magazines. Alexander Sterling wasn't classically handsome in the soft, cinematic way. His features were sharp, carved from granite, with intelligent, piercing blue eyes that seemed to analyze everything from the stock market tickers he occasionally glanced at on his phone to the structural integrity of the restaurant's vaulted ceilings. He rarely smiled, but when he did, it was a small, contained event that never quite reached his eyes. Isabella, on the other hand, was pure performance. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with raven hair that cascaded over her shoulders and a wardrobe that was a living catalogue of Parisian high fashion. She dripped charm, her laughter echoing like perfectly tuned wind chimes. To the casual observer, they were the ultimate power couple, his quiet, immense power and her dazzling social brilliance. But Catherine wasn't a casual observer. She was a professional. Her job depended on noticing the details others missed. She saw the way Isabella's smile would vanish the second Alexander looked away, replaced by a flicker of something cold and appraising. She saw the subtle tension in Alexander's jaw when Isabella placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm, a gesture that looked possessive rather than affectionate. It was a flawless performance, but Catherine could see the cracks in the facade. Catherine's life was a world away from theirs. Her apartment was small, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and the sound of Ava's intermittent dry cough from the other room. Ava was 16 with a wit as sharp as Alexander Sterling's gaze, but a body weakened by a rare autoimmune disorder. The medical bills were a mountain, and Catherine's paycheck from Aria was the tiny shovel she was using to try and tunnel through it. Every extra tip, every double shift was for Ava. The thought of her sister's pale face and hopeful eyes was the fuel that got Catherine through the nights of aching feet and condescending patrons. The first thread of the lie unraveled on a Tuesday. Tuesdays were usually slow at Aria, a night for quiet business dinners and clandestine meetings. Alexander Sterling was out of the country at a tech conference in Tokyo, according to a snippet of gossip Catherine overheard. It was nearly 10 p.m., and the restaurant was beginning to empty. Catherine was preparing a table for a late reservation when Isabella Romano walked in. But she wasn't alone. On her arm was a man who was the polar opposite of Alexander Sterling. He was slick and preened with a salesman's smile that didn't sit right. He oozed a manufactured charm that felt cheap compared to Alexander's authentic, if intimidating, presence. Catherine, hiding her surprise, led them to a secluded booth in the back, one often requested for privacy. The man's hand was low on Isabella's back, his fingers splayed with an easy familiarity that made Catherine's stomach clench. The usual Isabella Catherine asked, her voice a carefully controlled monotone. Isabella looked up, her eyes widening for a fraction of a second as she recognized Catherine. A mask of cool indifference immediately snapped into place. Just a bottle of the Sancerre, Catherine. My friend and I are celebrating. She gestured to the man beside her. This is Damien. Damien gave Catherine a dismissive once-over. Make it quick. Throughout their meal, Catherine remained the invisible waitress, but her ears were finely tuned. She couldn't hear everything, but she caught phrases that snagged in her mind, like burrs on a sweater. The transfer has to be seamless, Damien said, his voice a low hiss. Once we have the proprietary data, the sterling deal is dead in the water. Isabella laughed, a low, throaty sound. He suspects nothing. He's too busy playing God in Tokyo. He trusts me completely. His personal passcodes, his server access. It's all right there. He thinks my interest in his work is a sign of a supportive girlfriend. And you're sure the final encryption key is on his personal laptop, Damien pressed. He keeps everything there. His one weakness. He thinks no one can touch him in his own fortress, Isabella purred, taking a slow sip of wine. By the time he gets back, your company will have launched a parallel product, and his investors will scatter. He'll be ruined. Catherine felt a cold dread wash over her. This wasn't just cheating. This was a calculated, venomous takedown. This was corporate espionage wrapped in a love affair. She looked at Isabella, at her perfect face and expensive dress, and saw a predator. She thought of Alexander Sterling, a man she didn't know, a man who lived in a different universe, and felt a strange, unwilling pang of sympathy. He was arrogant, yes, but he was being systematically dismantled by the one person he seemed to trust. The rest of the night was a blur. Catherine went through the motions, her mind racing. What should she do? Nothing. It was the safe option. Keep her head down, collect her paycheck, and focus on Ava. Getting involved was insane. What was her word against that of Isabella Romano, a woman who could probably buy the restaurant and have her fired on a whim? Alexander Sterling would never believe a waitress. He'd probably assume she was trying to extort him. But then she pictured Ava's face. Catherine was trying to teach her sister about right and wrong, about having integrity, even when it was hard. What kind of example would she be if she stood by and watched this happen just because she was scared? The indecency of it all, the sheer, cold-blooded cruelty of Isabella's plan felt like a personal affront. It was the same kind of predatory behavior that allowed pharmaceutical companies to charge obscene amounts for life-saving drugs. The same callousness that defined the world she and Ava were struggling against. When she got home that night, the apartment was quiet. Ava was asleep, her breathing shallow. Catherine sat at their small kitchen table, the eviction notice mocking her from the fridge. She looked at the notice, then at the door to Ava's room. Her fear was a physical thing, a knot of ice in her chest. But beneath the fear, a slow, hot burn of resolve was beginning to form. She had to tell him. She had to take the risk. For a man she didn't know, for a principle she believed in, and for the kind of world she wanted Ava to grow up in. She just had to wait for the king to return to his castle, completely unaware of the viper he was sleeping next to. The 2 days that followed Catherine's discovery were a special form of torture. Every waking moment was consumed by a silent, frantic debate. Her conscience, a stern and unyielding voice that sounded suspiciously like her late mother's, insisted that staying silent was a form of complicity. It was a betrayal not just of a stranger, but of the principles she was trying to instill in Ava, that integrity mattered, that right and wrong were not dependent on convenience. But the voice of fear was far more insidious and persuasive. It whispered to her during the long, dark hours before dawn, presenting a vivid slideshow of potential disasters. It showed her the eviction notice on the fridge, no longer a piece of paper, but a looming monster. It showed her Ava's face, pale and strained after a missed dose of medication. It showed her the condescending face of Mr. Dubois as he fired her for meddling in the affairs of Aria's most powerful patrons. Fear argued that her primary responsibility was not to a billionaire she didn't know, but to the vulnerable girl sleeping in the next room. To risk their fragile stability for an abstract principle was not bravery. It was reckless foolishness. At work, she was a bundle of nerves. Every time the heavy oak doors of Aria swung open, her head would snap up her heart, lurching with a mixture of dread and anticipation. She scanned the reservation list obsessively. When she finally saw it on Friday afternoon, her blood ran cold. Sterling 2 guests, 8:00 p.m. It was a death sentence and an opportunity all in one. That evening, as she fastened the top button of her uniform, she felt as though she were preparing for battle. She caught her reflection in the mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, with a fear she couldn't conceal. She looked at a photo of her and Ava on her dresser, taken last summer, during a rare good health day at the park. That was her why. That was the reason for her fear, but it also had to be the reason for her courage. When Alexander Sterling and Isabella Romano arrived, the restaurant seemed to hold its breath. A wave of deference followed them to their prime corner table. Alexander looked as imposing as ever, though there were faint lines of fatigue around his eyes from his international flight. Isabella was a vision of triumph, clinging to his arm, her smile radiant. To Catherine, who now knew the truth, the entire scene was grotesque. Isabella's adoring gazes, her light, playful touches, it was all a masterclass in deception, and Alexander was its unwitting audience. Catherine's station was across the room, but she felt the gravitational pull of their table. She traded sections with a grateful junior waitress, claiming a preference for the quieter side of the room. Her hands trembled slightly as she filled their water glasses. "Welcome back, Mr. Sterling." "Ms. Romano," she said, her voice a carefully controlled monotone. Catherine Isabella acknowledged her, her tone smooth as silk. There was a glint of something in her eyes, amusement, pity, as if she were looking at a piece of furniture that had suddenly learned to speak. "It's so good to be back in civilization. Tokyo is dreadfully boring if you're not talking about microchips." Alexander simply gave a curt nod, his attention already on the wine list. For the next hour, Catherine existed in a state of heightened anxiety, going through the motions of service while listening with every fiber of her being. The opportunity she needed felt impossibly distant. Then it happened. Isabella's phone vibrated on the table. She glanced at the screen, and for a fraction of a second, her charming facade flickered. A look of serious, almost conspiratorial intent crossed her features before being smoothed away. "Oh, darling, I'm so sorry," she said, standing up and placing a hand on Alexander's shoulder. "It's the foundation. An urgent matter with the auction next week. I simply must take this. I'll be in the garden." She leaned down and kissed his cheek, a public gesture of affection that now seemed chillingly predatory to Catherine. As Isabella glided away, phone pressed to her ear, Alexander was left alone. He stared into his wine, a deep claret, swirling it slowly. In that moment, the powerful titan of industry looked isolated, the king alone in his castle, unaware the walls were about to be breached. It was now or never. Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs so violently, she felt it in her throat. She wiped her clammy palms on her apron. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at her to turn around to go polish glasses to blend back into the wallpaper. But the image of Ava's trusting face propelled her forward. The walk across the plush carpet felt like crossing a vast, empty desert. With each step, she felt the eyes of other diners on her. She reached the table, her shadow falling across the white linen. Mr. Sterling. He looked up, and his piercing blue eyes, momentarily unfocused, sharpened on her with startling speed. The brief look of introspection was gone, replaced by a wall of cool, impenetrable authority. "Yes," he asked, his tone implying she was an unwelcome interruption. "Is there an issue?" "No, sir. The service is fine. I apologize for this intrusion. It's about something else." A flicker of annoyance. "If this is a complaint about another staff member, please take it to your manager." It was a clear dismissal. It's not that she pressed her voice, barely more than a whisper. She felt a frantic urgency. Isabella could return at any second. "So this is going to sound insane, and you have every reason to fire me for saying it. But I had to tell you, when you were in Tokyo on Tuesday night, Ms. Romano was here." His eyes narrowed. He said nothing, simply held her gaze, forcing her to continue. "She was with another man," Catherine's words tumbled out. "His name is Damien. I know because I served their table. And I overheard them talking. Sir, it isn't just that she's cheating on you. It's worse. They were planning to ruin you. They mentioned your company a deal. They talked about getting proprietary data from your personal laptop. They said that by the time you returned, it would be too late." The silence that descended on the table was absolute, a pocket of ice in the warm, buzzing restaurant. Alexander Sterling's face had become completely unreadable, a mask of cold fury. The only sign of his inner turmoil was the tightening of his grip on his wine glass, his knuckles turning stark white. He looked at her, truly looked at her, but not with understanding. He looked at her as if she were a specimen under a microscope, something to be analyzed and categorized. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously soft, a silken threat. "I see," he said. "Let me try to understand the situation. You, a waitress, believe you have uncovered a grand conspiracy, and you've decided to bring this information to me." He leaned forward, his gaze pinning her to the spot. "Tell me, Catherine, what's your angle? What is it you're hoping to achieve with this elaborate story angle?" She stammered, confused. "There's no angle. I thought you had a right to know." A dry, mirthless smile touched his lips. "Oh, I'm sure you did. I've seen your type before. You see a man like me, and you see an opportunity. You invent a crisis, a betrayal, something to make you seem indispensable. You hope for a reward, a payout for your loyalty. Or perhaps this is a more direct shakedown. Is that it? Am I supposed to pay you to make this story go away?" Each word was a deliberate, calculated strike. Catherine felt the color drain from her face. He saw her not as a person, but as a caricature, a common gold digger. "No," she insisted, her voice trembling with the force of his injustice. "You're wrong. That's not what this is, isn't it?" He countered, his voice dropping even lower. He placed his napkin on the table with grim finality. "I suggest you go back to your station and forget this conversation ever happened." Consider your employment here, which I assure you is hanging by a very thin thread, and decide if interfering in my life is worth the price." At that precise moment, Isabella returned her face, wreathed in a brilliant smile. "All sorted, darling," she said, sliding back into her seat. She glanced at Catherine, who was standing frozen by the table, and then at Alexander's thunderous expression. "Is everything all right?" Alexander's demeanor shifted with breathtaking speed. The cold fury vanished, replaced by a smooth, unreadable mask. "Perfectly," he said, his eyes locking with Catherine's in a look of pure ice. "The staff here is just exceptionally attentive." The unspoken threat was a physical blow. Humiliated and utterly defeated, Catherine turned and fled back to the relative safety of the service station, her heart shattered. She had gambled everything on a single act of integrity, and she had lost in the most spectacular fashion. The next morning, she awoke to a world that felt grey and hopeless. She was just mentally preparing herself for a call from Mr. Dubois when a sharp knock echoed on her door. It was the landlord, she was sure of it. She opened the door to find a courier in a severe black uniform holding a tablet and a single sleek black envelope. He confirmed her name, had her sign the screen with a stylus, and departed without a word. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. Inside there was no letter, no explanation, only a piece of heavy black metal. Sterling Unlimited. Below the name was a small, stiff card on which was typed a single cryptic sentence. "For your troubles." Catherine sank onto her couch, staring at the object in her hand. Her mind reeled. This wasn't an apology, it was a dismissal. It was the insult he had thrown at her, now given physical form. It was blood money, a bribe to ensure her silence. He hadn't believed her story, but he was willing to pay to make the storyteller disappear. Or was it something else, a final, cruel test to prove his cynical assessment of her character? He was daring her to become the opportunist he had already judged her to be. The card wasn't a gift. It was a weapon, and it was aimed directly at her soul. For 2 full days, the black card sat on Catherine's small kitchen counter, an obsidian rectangle of impossible promise and terrifying consequence. It wasn't just a piece of metal, it was a living entity in her cramped apartment. Its presence was a constant low hum beneath the surface of her thoughts. It seemed to watch her as she measured out Ava's medication, its matte surface absorbing the dim light, offering a silent, seductive solution to every problem that kept her awake at night. The temptation was a physical ache. On Saturday afternoon, after receiving another automated email reminder that a payment for Ava's specialist consultation was overdue, Catherine found herself sitting at the kitchen table, her laptop open, the Sterling Unlimited card in her hand. It felt unnaturally heavy, weighted with the gravity of what it represented. She typed in the hospital's web address, navigated to the payment portal, and saw the damning numbers on the screen. It was a sum so large it felt like fiction. With a trembling finger, she clicked on the credit card payment option. She could end this. Right now. One sequence of 16 numbers, and this particular monster would be slain. Ava would have her appointment. The threatening letters would stop. She could breathe. Her gaze flickered between the screen and the card. She saw Alexander Sterling's face in her mind, his eyes narrowed with disdain, his voice dripping with condescending certainty as he called her an opportunist. "Are you hoping I'll pay you for this little piece of drama you've invented?" Using the card would prove him right. It would validate his cynical view of the world, a world where everyone had a price, where integrity was a commodity to be bought and sold. Her warning, an act born of pure principle, would be retroactively tainted, transformed into a clever, successful shakedown. And she would know every time she looked at her sister that Ava's health had been purchased with a lie. With a shuddering breath, Catherine snapped the laptop shut. She slid the card back into its elegant black sleeve and pushed it to the far corner of the counter. She would not become the person he thought she was. She would face the consequences of her choice, whatever they may be. Surviving with her honor intact was a victory in itself, even if it felt like a hollow one. Going to work on Monday was an exercise in pure dread. Walking into Aria felt different. The air, usually filled with professional calm, was thick with unspoken tension. Her co-workers, who were usually friendly enough now, offered tight, fleeting smiles and avoided her gaze. Whispers fell silent as she approached. She was an outcast, marked by an invisible stain. Mr. Dubois, the manager, gave her a brief, pained look before busying himself with the reservation book. Catherine knew that Alexander Sterling must have said something, and the entire restaurant was holding its breath, waiting for the axe to fall. She performed her duties with robotic precision, her senses on high alert. Every swing of the kitchen door made her flinch. Finally, at the height of the evening rush, the axe fell. Isabella Romano entered the restaurant, and it was immediately clear she was not there for dinner. She moved with the deadly grace of a panther, her expensive dress flowing around her like a shroud. There was no charming smile, no social grace. Her face was a mask of cold, righteous fury, and her eyes, like a heat-seeking missile, scanned the dining room and locked onto Catherine. She didn't stride. She stalked. The patrons at the table, Catherine was serving a wealthy couple discussing a yacht purchase, fell silent as Isabella arrived, casting a chilling shadow over them. Isabella's voice was low, yet it cut through the ambient clatter of the restaurant like a shard of glass. Mr. Dubois was there in an instant, his hands fluttering nervously. "Ms. Romano, good evening. Is everything all right? Can I show you to a table? Don't bother." Isabella said, her eyes never leaving Catherine's. She turned to Mr. Dubois, her expression shifting into one of profound, theatrical victimhood. "I'm afraid something terrible has happened. I'm the victim of a crime committed right here in your establishment. By your staff." A hush spread from their table outwards, a ripple effect of alarm and curiosity. Diners lowered their forks. Conversations halted. "A crime," Mr. Dubois stammered, his face paling. To Isabella announced the word ringing out in the suddenly quiet room. She turned her venomous gaze back to Catherine. "I am missing a diamond earring, a priceless family heirloom given to me by my grandmother. I remember feeling it come loose when we dined here on Friday. And I remember who was hovering around our table being so attentive." The implication was as subtle as a sledgehammer. Catherine felt the blood drain from her face, a cold numbness spreading through her limbs. I wouldn't do that," she managed, her voice a strained whisper. "Oh, you wouldn't." Isabella's laugh was a sharp, ugly bark that made several people flinch. "That's not what my fiancé says. He told me you approached him with some ludicrous story, some pathetic attempt to drive a wedge between us. When your lies didn't work, you resorted to this. Common petty theft." She addressed Mr. Dubois again, her voice resonating with power and privilege. "I demand you search her personal belongings, her locker, her purse, everything. Do it now, or I will call the police and let them handle it. And I assure you, if you refuse, Mr. Sterling, and I will make it our personal mission to ensure every person of influence in this city knows that Aurea harbors thieves." It was a checkmate. Mr. Dubois was trapped between protecting his employee and protecting his business from utter ruin. His face slick with sweat was a portrait of misery. He looked at Catherine, his eyes pleading for her to understand. "Catherine, just to clear your name, let's go to the back." The walk to the staff area was the longest of Catherine's life. She felt dozens of pairs of eyes on her back, burning with judgment and suspicion. It was a walk of shame, a public execution of her character. Isabella followed a step behind the victorious predator. In the cramped staff room, Catherine numbly opened her small metal locker. Before she could even reach inside, Isabella shoved her aside with a contemptuous push. "Allow me." She began to tear through Catherine's meager possessions with theatrical disdain, her worn-out spare shoes, a half-eaten energy bar, the nursing textbook she read during her breaks. Then her hand went to the pocket of Catherine's thin coat, the one she wore for the cold walk home. Isabella's fingers closed around something. She pulled her hand out slowly, dramatically, and opened her palm. Resting there, glittering maliciously under the harsh fluorescent light, was a diamond stud earring. Catherine gasped. It was impossible. It wasn't hers. It had been planted. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "No, I've never seen that before." She put it there. Isabella turned to Mr. Dubois with a look of vindicated sorrow. "You see, the girl is a pathological liar, as well as a thief." All the fight went out of Mr. Dubois. The evidence, however fabricated, was irrefutable in this context. His duty was clear. "Catherine," he said, his voice heavy with a resignation that felt like a betrayal. "Take your things. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you. I'm sorry." Catherine stood frozen for a moment, the world tilting on its axis. She had been expertly and ruthlessly dismantled, stripped of her job, her income, and her good name in one fell swoop. She packed her few belongings into her bag, the weight of the planted earring seemingly dragging her down. As she walked out of Aria for the last time, she didn't look at anyone. She couldn't bear to see their faces. The viper had struck, and the venom was already coursing through her life. Meanwhile, across the city, Alexander Sterling was waging a quieter, more calculated war. His initial interaction with Catherine had left him unsettled. His dismissal of her had been a reflex, a defense mechanism built from years of deflecting opportunists. But her raw fear had lodged itself in his mind. It lacked the slick artifice of a con artist. On Saturday morning, he had made 2 calls. The first was to his private bank to issue the black card with strict instructions to monitor it for any activity and report back to him directly. It was a baited trap, a test of character. The second call was to Ben Carter, a discreet private investigator he had used before. "I have a name for you," Alexander had said, his voice clipped. "Catherine Evans. She's a waitress at Aria. I don't want her followed. I don't want her harassed. I want to know who she is. I want to know her history, her financial situation, her family, everything. Find out if she has a reason to lie, or, more importantly, if she has a reason to tell the truth." On Monday evening, just as Isabella was preparing her assault at Aria, Ben Carter's encrypted report arrived in Alexander's inbox. He opened it, expecting to find a history of petty crime or a string of debts from a gambling addiction, something to confirm his initial suspicions. What he found instead stopped him cold. The report was a stark, brutal portrait of quiet desperation. It detailed Catherine's life as the sole caregiver for her 16-year-old sister Ava, who was suffering from a debilitating and expensive autoimmune disorder. It included copies of mounting medical bills, letters from insurance companies, denying coverage for experimental treatments, and Catherine's own applications for financial aid, all rejected. Her employment history was spotless, her personal record clean. The report painted a picture not of a grifter, but of a young woman working herself to the bone against impossible odds, fighting a silent, lonely war for her sister's life. Alexander leaned back in his leather chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating a flicker of deep regret on his face. He had accused this woman of being a gold digger, yet here was the proof she was drowning in debt, and the lifeline he had thrown her, the black card, remained untouched. He had tested her character, and she had passed with flying colours, choosing destitution over dishonesty. A profound, unfamiliar feeling of shame washed over him. His thoughts were interrupted by the urgent buzz of his private line. It was Marcus, his head of corporate security. Sir Marcus's voice was tense. "We have a Priority 1 breach. An outbound data packet was just flagged by our heuristic analysis protocol. It's big, and it's encrypted with something I've never seen before. But the crucial thing is the origin. It was sent from a device authorized with your executive-level credentials from your home network." Alexander felt a jolt, as if he'd touched a live wire. "When Marcus 10 minutes ago. We're still trying to crack the encryption, but we've already traced the destination IP. It resolves to a numbered shell corporation. A shell corporation that, after 3 layers of obfuscation, is wholly owned by Croft Industries." Damien Croft, the name Catherine had given him. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in his mind with the force of a physical impact. The slick man with Isabella, the overheard conversation, the proprietary data. Isabella's sudden, intense interest in the minutiae of his work, her late nights in his home office, supposedly catching up on emails. It was all a lie. A long, elaborate, and devastatingly effective con. Catherine's warning hadn't been drama. It had been a prophecy. He realized with a sickening clarity what Isabella's attack on Catherine at the restaurant was truly about. It wasn't just spite. It was a strategic move, a final act of sabotage to utterly annihilate the credibility of the only witness before the heist was complete. While he was being robbed, his accomplice was busy destroying the one person who had tried to sound the alarm. His shame curdled into a cold, diamond-hard fury. He had been played his trust used as a weapon against him. But worse, far worse, he had stood by and allowed an innocent, courageous woman to be sacrificed in the process. He pulled up the PI's report again, looking at the grainy photo of Catherine's run-down apartment building. The game was over. The real one was about to begin. He picked up his phone, his expression now transformed into a mask of pure, calculated resolve. He wasn't just going to mitigate the damage. He was going to bring their world crashing down around them. And his first act would be to personally retrieve the one honest soldier left on the battlefield. The walk home from Aria was a blur of streetlights and shimmering pavement, each reflection distorted by the hot tears that streamed down Catherine's face. The city, usually a vibrant backdrop to her life, felt hostile and alien. Every passing stranger's glance felt like an accusation. The humiliation was a physical cloak, heavy and suffocating. She had been publicly branded a thief, her name and dignity methodically shredded by Isabella's vicious, calculated performance. The Viper's strike had been perfectly executed, and Catherine was left with nothing but the poison of its aftermath. She let herself into the apartment, the click of the lock echoing in the profound silence. The air was thick with the scent of her failure. She leaned against the door, her bag sliding from her shoulder and hitting the floor with a dull thud. From the other room, Ava's soft voice called out, "Catherine, is that you?" Catherine squeezed her eyes shut, forcing down a sob. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, composing her features into a mask of normality before pushing the bedroom door open. Ava was sitting up in bed, a book resting in her lap, her face illuminated by a small reading light. "You're home early," she observed, her eyes so much like Catherine's, full of concern. "Slow night." Catherine lied the words, tasting like ash in her mouth. She managed a weak smile. Everyone decided to stay home and count their money, I guess. Ava chuckled a small, breathy sound. Their loss. More of you for me. Catherine sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under her weight. The simple, unconditional love in her sister's eyes was almost unbearable. How could she explain that their already precarious world had just crumbled? How could she tell this girl who fought so bravely every day that the sister she relied on had just lost their only lifeline? She couldn't. So she just smoothed the blanket over Ava's legs and talked about trivial things, her voice a fragile shield against the crushing weight of their new reality. The next day was a descent into a special kind of hell. Catherine sat at her kitchen table, the laptop a portal to endless rejection. She applied for everything: barista, supermarket, stocker, call center operator, dishwasher. Her single glowing reference from Aria was now toxic waste. A few potential employers asked why she'd left, and she could offer no explanation that didn't sound like a guilty excuse. By late afternoon, with a dozen applications sent into the digital void and no replies, a profound hopelessness began to set in. She was tainted unhirable. She looked at the sterling unlimited card still sitting in the corner of the counter. It wasn't a temptation anymore. It was a monument to her folly, a sleek black tombstone for her principles. That evening, as she was staring blankly at the eviction notice on the fridge, calculating how many days they had left, a knock echoed through the apartment. It wasn't the landlord's impatient rap or a courier's quick tap. It was a solid, deliberate, and deeply unfamiliar sound. Her heart leaped into her throat. Perhaps Isabella had sent the police to harass her further. With trembling hands, she opened the door a few inches. Standing in the dingy, flickering light of the hallway was Alexander Sterling. He was an apparition from another universe. His custom-tailored suit, the crisp white of his shirt, the sheer aura of power and wealth that surrounded him, it all seemed to warp the mundane reality of her apartment building. He looked tired, his face etched with a gravity she hadn't seen before, but his blue eyes were clear and intensely focused on her. "Catherine," he said, his voice quiet but resonant. "I know this is an intrusion. May I please have a moment of your time?" She was too shocked to speak, so she just stepped back, pulling the door open. He entered her small living space, and the room seemed to shrink around him. His gaze swept across the room, taking in the worn furniture, the stack of ominous-looking medical envelopes, and finally settling on the black card on the counter. His expression tightened with a flicker of what looked like self-reproach. "I came here to apologize," he began, turning to face her fully. There was no arrogance in his posture, no condescension in his tone. He was stripped of his corporate armor. "What I said to you at the restaurant was inexcusable. My behavior was arrogant and dismissive, and I am deeply sorry for it. I was wrong. About you, about Isabella, about everything." Catherine stared at him, suspicion and hurt warring within her. "Why are you here to gloat? Your girlfriend already destroyed my life. Isn't that enough? This isn't about her," he said firmly. "This is about me admitting the truth. And the truth is you were right. I didn't believe you, Catherine, but your warning, it stayed with me. Your fear felt too real." He took a step closer. "I tested you. The card was a test. I told myself that if you used it, you were an opportunist. It was a cynical, ugly thing to do, and you passed my test by refusing to stoop to my level. You shamed me with your integrity." He went on to explain everything. The private investigator he'd hired, not to dig up dirt, but to understand the woman who had risked so much. He spoke of reading the report, of learning about Ava, of the dawning, horrifying realization of the burdens she carried. And then he said, his voice, hardening my head, of security called. There was a massive data breach, a transfer of my company's most valuable intellectual property sent from my home network to a shell corporation owned by Damien Croft. He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. It all happened while Isabella was at Aria, systematically destroying your reputation to ensure no one would ever listen to you. Your warning wasn't just about her cheating. You stumbled into the middle of a multi-million-dollar corporate espionage plot. Catherine sank onto the arm of her couch, her leg suddenly weak. It was all real. She wasn't crazy. "I am not asking for your forgiveness," Alexander continued. "I know I don't deserve it. But I am asking for your help. I have called an emergency board meeting for 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Isabella and Damien will be there. They believe they are walking into my surrender. In reality, they are walking into a trap. I have the digital evidence to prove their guilt, but it's just data on a screen. I need more than that. I need the human element. I need the truth. Catherine, I need you to be there and tell them to their faces what you witnessed." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Catherine's shock. To face Isabella again, in a room full of powerful, ruthless people who would see her as nothing. "They won't believe me," she whispered. "I'm just a waitress, a fired waitress who was accused of being a thief." "No." Alexander said, his conviction absolute. "You are the bravest person I have met in a very long time. You are the one person in this entire affair who has acted with honor. They will listen to you because you are my witness, and they will listen because the truth, when spoken with courage, has a power all its own. Please, Catherine, help me finish this." She looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the regret in his eyes, but she also saw a steely resolve that mirrored her own. This was a chance to reclaim her name, to see justice served not just for Alexander Sterling's company, but for the callous cruelty she had endured. This was her chance to fight back. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she stood up. "I'll do it." The next morning, Catherine stood before the towering glass and steel edifice of Sterling Innovations. She wore her only interview outfit, a simple black blazer and slacks, feeling like a sparrow about to fly into a hurricane. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, and Alexander emerged, holding the door open for her. The short drive to the top-floor boardroom was silent, an unspoken understanding passing between them. He was providing the battlefield. She was providing the most crucial weapon. The boardroom was even more intimidating than she had imagined. A long, polished mahogany table reflected the sky, surrounded by stern-faced board members who looked at her with undisguised curiosity. And at the far end, sitting like triumphant monarchs, were Isabella and Damien. The moment they saw Catherine enter beside Alexander, their composure shattered. Damien's smug smile evaporated, replaced by confusion. Isabella's face went rigid, a flash of pure venomous panic in her eyes, before she masked it with icy indignation. "Alexander, what is the meaning of this?" Damien boomed, attempting to seize control. "We are here to discuss the terms of your company's transition, not to be ambushed by disgruntled ex-employees." Alexander took his place at the head of the table, a silent, commanding presence. "The only transition being discussed today is yours, Damien, into a federal investigation." He gestured to Catherine. "Before we review the technical data, I want you all to hear from Ms. Catherine Evans. She has been the victim of a vicious smear campaign, and she is the person whose courage brought this conspiracy to light." Every eye in the room turned to Catherine. Her hands trembled under the table. She took a breath, pictured Ava's trusting face, and began to speak. Her voice was shaky. At first, a small sound in the cavernous room, but it grew stronger as she went on. She recounted the Tuesday night dinner, quoting the damning phrases she had overheard. She looked directly at Isabella, her gaze unwavering. You talked about the Sterling deal being dead in the water. You talked about how he trusted you completely, how you had all his passcodes. Then she described the public humiliation at Aria, the planted earring, the loss of her job and her name. Damien laughed a harsh, dismissive sound. This is pathetic. A fairy tale spun by a desperate, thieving waitress to extort money. There is no proof on the contrary, Alexander said calmly. There is a great deal of proof. He nodded to his security chief. The lights dimmed, and the large screen at the end of the room flickered to life. The first thing on screen was crystal-clear security footage from Aria's staff room. The board watched in stunned silence as Isabella Romano, believing she was unobserved, slipped the glittering earring into the pocket of Catherine's coat. A collective gasp went through the room. Isabella's face turned ashen. Next, a complex diagram of the data breach appeared, showing the transfer from Alexander's home network directly to the Croft Industries Shell Corporation, time-stamped to the exact minute. Finally, a series of recovered encrypted text messages between Isabella and Damien scrolled onto the screen messages that laid out their entire plot in their own words. The boardroom was utterly silent, the weight of the betrayal palpable. This woman Alexander said, his voice ringing with cold fury as he stood and placed a hand on Catherine's shoulder. This desperate waitress is a hero. She tried to warn me, and I was too arrogant to listen. She endured humiliation and lost her livelihood, all while holding the key to a fortune on her kitchen counter, and she never once compromised her principles. He fixed his gaze on the two conspirators. You didn't just try to rob my company. You tried to ruin an innocent person, and for that there is no forgiveness. He looked at his security chief, his voice dropping to a command. Call the authorities. Now. Later that day, in the quiet expanse of his office, Alexander faced Catherine across his desk. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. They were no longer patron and waitress, but two people bound by the truth. The board has approved a 7-figure reward for you, he said, sliding a thick envelope towards her. For services to the company. Catherine looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. My name is cleared. That's all the reward I need. A small, genuine smile touched Alexander's lips. I know. That envelope is a formality. This, he said, sliding 2 other documents across the polished wood, is not. This is restitution. And it's an investment in character. Catherine's hands trembled as she picked them up. The first was the deed to her apartment, officially signed over to her name, the mortgage settled in full. The second was a letter from a world-renowned medical foundation. It stated that Ava Evans had been accepted effective immediately into a fully funded clinical trial for her condition, with all medical travel and living expenses covered for the duration of her treatment. Tears streamed down Catherine's face. But these were not tears of pain or humiliation. They were tears of overwhelming, earth-shattering relief. It was more than a home. It was security. It was more than medical care. It was a future for her sister. There is one more thing, Alexander said gently. He slid a final file toward her. It was a formal employment contract. I've learned a valuable lesson. My company is protected by firewalls and algorithms, but its greatest vulnerability is human. I'm creating a new division of internal oversight and ethics. I need someone to lead it, someone who is naturally observant, who understands people, and who has the unwavering courage to speak up when something is wrong, no matter who they're speaking to. He looked her directly in the eye. I'm not offering you a job out of charity, Catherine. I'm offering you a position because you are, without question, the most qualified person I know. Catherine looked down at the contract at the title, Director of Internal Oversight, and then back at the man who had once scorned her. He wasn't just giving her a job. He was giving her back her power, validating the very essence of who she was. She pushed the contract back towards him, picked up a pen from his desk, and signed her name with a firm, confident hand. I accept. Catherine's story is a powerful reminder that integrity is a currency of its own, and that doing the right thing, even when it's the hardest thing, can unlock doors you never knew existed. She wasn't a princess rescued from a tower. She was a warrior who stood her ground, and in doing so forged her own kingdom. Her courage didn't just expose a lie, it built a new, better future for herself and her sister. What do you think was the biggest test of Catherine's character? The millionaire's insult, the temptation of the black card, or the public humiliation by Isabella? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of courage and conviction resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that good deeds don't go unnoticed, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that will inspire and move you.